Okay, I'm just going to go forward, assuming that everyone can hear me. Okay, uh, nice to see you all. I'm Greg McDermid, as just introduced. I'm the PI of the BERA program. I've got a few things I need to do here this morning, I think, to get this workshop aimed in the right direction. I first want to maybe introduce the BERA partnership a little bit. This is the group that's been working together since 2015. So we're in our second 5-year cycle. So our first 5-year cycle is 2015 to 20. And then we got renewed for a second 5 years just as COVID hit. So it was a bit of a rocky start, but I would say last year we got started for real. So we're kind of in year 2, I would say, of our second 5-year program. So it's a really nice place to be right now, I would say, because our team is largely in place. We've got one major field season under our belt, and yet we're still early enough along in the program that we can still have meaningful interactions. So we're really happy that you've all come forward, and we're going to have a productive day here. So I've got 3 things I need to do before we get on to the bulk of the program, or the heart of the program. I'm going to first briefly describe the issues that we're trying to address here in the boreal forest. So I know that most of you are very well acquainted with these, but I still think that this is a worthwhile place to start. Next, I'm going to go through the goals and objectives of our program and show you some of the things that our team is committed to doing in the second 5-year cycle. And then I'm going to talk about the goals of the workshop and look at our program and reflect a little bit on what I think a productive day is going to look like. Like learning how to use the technology. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the boreal forest, an extremely interesting, beautiful, and dynamic place, and a global treasure, as we just heard, and we Canadians are the stewards of the boreal forest, at least the Canadian portion of it. Now, when I think of the boreal forest, I think of 3 things. I think of wildlife, water, and carbon. So let's just take a few minutes to reflect on these things. So first of all, wildlife. The boreal forest is a very biodiverse place and one of the last mostly intact terrestrial biomes on the planet. Much of this biodiversity is in the form of some of the less heralded species, the mosses and the lichens and whatnot, but there are also many Canadian icons like caribou, moose, wolverine, and bear. Tremendous number of migratory species, 3 to 5 billion migratory species use the boreal annually. Water, a massive store of fresh water that we can trace back to the Ice Age, basically a giant sponge up there containing 50% of the world's lakes and 25% of the world's wetlands. And then carbon. The boreal forest has this amazing capacity to store carbon. Now, when people think of carbon in forests, I know they normally think about the trees, but in the boreal forest, it's a little bit different. Conditions there are such that the organic materials originating from the vegetation get locked up in the soil, particularly in the wetlands. So these wetlands, the peatlands, have been building up carbon since the last ice age, 11,000 years ago. So all told, these peatlands contain 30% of the world's soil carbon, which is obviously a globally significant stock. So we want to keep that carbon in the soil and make sure that our wetlands continue to perform this function as carbon sequesters. Now, the next thing I want to do is take some time to look at the boreal forest in Alberta and talk about some of the challenges that we face here. The main thing, obviously, is that in addition to all of these things that I just mentioned, the boreal forest is also a huge part of the Canadian economy. So I always like to do this with Google Earth Engine. I hope you don't mind this perspective. I'm a remote sensor, so I'm kind of used to looking at the world this way. So this is the boreal forest near Conklin, Alberta. This is Kirby South, which is one of our main study sites, and we're looking at it from satellite imagery a few hundred kilometers above the Earth. So I like this because I think it really helps us to summarize the issues that we're going to be talking about today. So you can see that this is a pretty busy landscape with lots of industrial activity going on related to natural resource extraction. When I look here, I see all-purpose, all-weather roads. I see exploratory well sites. I see well pads with equipment on them. If you look closely, you can see forest harvest areas, pipelines, transmission lines. And then if you look really closely, you can see lots and lots of subtle seismic lines all over the landscape. So together, all of this stuff is known as human footprint. The physical disturbances that are visible to the naked eye, either when you're standing there or when you're looking at the scene from above. And I would say that this landscape is fairly representative to what you'll find throughout the in situ oil sands region. Now, of course, all of this physical footprint has got functional effects on various parts of the ecosystem. Probably the most widely publicized of these effects is on caribou. Human footprint features like the ones here in Kirby South dissect the landscape and open it up to ungulates like moose and white-tailed deer, which in turn boost predator numbers. And this apparent competition between caribou and other ungulates contributes to the decline of woodland caribou populations. It's not just caribou. There was a paper a few years ago by Fisher and Burton that showed that this type of oil sands landscapes has shifted the entire community of mammals. So you have winners on the landscape like deer and lynx, and then losers on the landscape like caribou, red fox, and bear. Another paper a few years later by Mahan et al. Showed that the same sort of thing is happening with birds. And all of this is complicated by the fact that it's not just wildlife that we need to be concerned with. BERA co-PI Marie Strack has been instrumental in showing how in situ disturbances also alter carbon dynamics in the boreal forest. And like I said, this is concerning because Alberta peatlands represent this huge stock of soil carbon, and we'd like to keep it in the ground. So for years, since BERA started, we've got this question that I think Robert Albrecht posed early on. I just need to know when human footprint is no longer footprint. So that seems really simple. Why don't we just figure out when human footprint is no longer footprint? But it's really extraordinarily complex, because what you're really asking is, when is footprint restored? And what you have to recognize is that the footprint is a physical thing. It's the things that you can see in this image. But restoration refers to functional things. So any given action that's designed to reduce footprint could have multiple functional responses. Some are intended and some are unintended. So for example, we could apply silvicultural treatments like mounting and planting to improve tree recruitment on these lines, and it might have unintended consequences on things like hydrology or carbon dynamics. So complicated. If you want to restore footprint, if you want to make footprint go away, then you need to think about things from the lens of a particular management goal, I would say. So in BERA, we had to select our priorities. These are the ones that we're currently working on. First of all, promoting a return to forest cover, restoring natural carbon dynamics, enhancing caribou habitat, and maintaining habitat for other wildlife species. Now, I don't want to portray BERA as only a program that's concerned with seismic lines, but it is certainly one of our main focal points, and it really helps to illustrate the nature of BERA, I would say. So let's take a look at this scenario, which is, this is the scenario. Let's take a look at the scenario. We're looking down the forest through two seismic lines. So but for restoration perspective, we kind of want to know, are these lines there or not? And as I've explained, this is a complicated question because we need to distinguish between the physical thing that we're looking at and these functional things that we're concerned with. So in BERA, we use the term strategic management goals. And these are the four things that you've already seen. So promoting a return to forest cover, restoring natural carbon dynamics, enhancing caribou habitat, and maintaining wildlife habitat. These are the four things that BERA has contributed or decided to work on. Now, the challenge here is we're working this extraordinarily complicated system. Boy, my animations are not in the order that I expected they would be. So we're working this extraordinarily complicated system where there's all these biotic and abiotic things that interact with each other and have all these feedbacks. So we have to try and understand the system before we do anything to try and meet one of these objectives. And we really have two choices here. We can leave things for natural, which is sort of a passive approach to treatments, or we can do some active treatment. Those are our two choices. Now, in order to, we want to gain a deeper understanding of this system, but we can't model everything. We can't do everything. So again, we sort of had to make some choices. So here's what we've selected. We call them in BERA tactical deliverables. So in the promote a return to forest cover world, we're aiming at building knowledge and tools that will help us promote a return to forest cover by understanding growth and survival, by modeling and understanding abundance, and by modeling and understanding height. In animal use and human use, we're looking to enhance caribou habitat and maintain wildlife. Oh, sorry, backwards. In these two other priorities, we're looking to understand animal use and human use. In restoring natural carbon dynamics, we've got, carbon and methane emissions, carbon stock, and eco-hydrological conditions and hydroclimatic conditions. There's actually a fifth BERA priority that doesn't fit very well in this diagram, but it's remote sensing. So in addition to understanding the physical and biological processes in play here, we want to develop remote sensing tools to assist restoration assessment, which is deciding where we need to be perform active interventions, and restoration monitoring, which is where we track these treatments after they've been applied. So by the way, that diagram I'm showing you here, the one with all the arrows, we call that a process diagram in BERA, and they're meant to describe the subjects that each team is dealing with. And you're going to be seeing quite a bit more of these throughout the day. So I'm going to use them to introduce some of our other co-PIs who oversee each of the themes that you're seeing on the slide here right now. So first of all, we've got Scott Nielsen from the University of Alberta, who heads our vegetation team and is concerned with research aimed at promoting return to forest cover. Then we have Maria Strack and Scott Ketchison, soils and ecohydrology team, looking at restoring natural carbon dynamics. They have to team up here because there's so many arrows in their diagram. Aaron Bain from the University of Alberta, humans and wildlife lead. And then myself from the University of Calgary, I do the remote sensing. Okay, now, I don't want to spend too much time looking backwards today, but I know we have a lot of new people here, so I thought it'd be worthwhile to spend a little bit of time looking back at some of the things we've accomplished. I don't know if you've seen the little document sitting up at the front desk. We call this our synthesis document, synthesis report. I'll welcome you to pick one up if you don't have one already. I'm not going to go through everything in here. I could easily talk for 2 hours about our accomplishments, so I'm just going to highlight a couple of things as a sampler. Now, when it comes to translating our research results to practice, we tend not to talk too much about our process diagrams. Rather, we try and speak in the language of practitioners. So BERA conducts research on every phase of restoration, planning, implementing, and monitoring. So as I said, I'm not going to be able to do everything that's in the booklet and the things that are not in the booklet, but I have made a few selections. So on the planning front, I'm going to describe something we call the forest line mapper, which enables aerial detection and recovery on seismic lines. In implementing, I'm going to highlight some of the findings there, including that upright mounds and hummock transfers may be effective alternatives to conventional mounting techniques. And I at first thought I was going to find some time to do something on the monitoring front, where we found that drones could enable efficient aerial monitoring of restoration programs. But after sober second thought this morning, I decided I can't do all three. I'm going to scratch that last one. You'll have to come talk to me if you want to hear about that one. Okay, so first of all, forest line mapper enables aerial detection of recovered seismic lines during planning. So as I'm sure you know, not every seismic line in a GIS database looks exactly the same on the ground. We have lines that are recovering very well. We have lines that are in a state of arrested succession. And if you're to just pull up your database of seismic lines in your GIS, you won't be able to differentiate between the two. The other thing is if you look carefully at the lines in your GIS, they don't really match what's going on the ground because they were just digitized by humans who probably were using them for some sort of cartographic reason. And so they work great for cartography, but if you're going to do any detailed management on the basis of these things, you're going to have to redraw them. So, and imagine having to redraw all of those lines and make them accurate. And not only do we want the center line, we probably want to know the extent of the lines, the footprint itself. So this would be a massive undertaking. And if you're doing restoration planning, this is part of the task. So researchers in our group have developed something called the forest line mapper, where if you input a canopy height model from LiDAR, then this thing will automatically delineate the lines. Both the center line, which you can see in the lighter red, and then the footprint or the extent of the line, which you could see in the dark red. And it does it automatically so you can have a sleep, and the next day, hopefully, you've got some better looking lines for your purposes. Not only does it delineate the lines, it also extracts a whole bunch of attributes from the lines themselves and then from the surrounding matrix, which I won't go into the details of. I'll also say that this is open source software that we distribute through GitHub. And so if you would like to use this, you're welcome to. You're also welcome to contribute this because this is something that you can pull and you can add to and then contribute back. By the way, Richard Zeng, who is our main architect of Forest Line Mapper, is here today. And at lunch, he's going to be doing some demos and you can have a conversation with him here on the side. The last thing I'll say is the Forest Line Mapper is really just the first of what we're planning is a whole suite of tools that we're going to call BERA tools. Come back in a few years and we'll talk more about BERA tools. The next thing I wanted to discuss is our finding that upright mounds and hummock transfers may be effective alternatives to conventional mounting techniques. So historical disturbances on linear features often result in this condition where the soils have been compressed, especially in wetlands. So this removes the natural hummock and hollow microtopography, which is characteristic of that landscape. And it's important to have that if you want to establish woody vegetation for return to forest cover. So this is an extreme example here. This is likely a seismic line that's been repurposed as a winter road, but it still illustrates the point. You can see how compressed it is and how much lower the line is compared to the surrounding landscape. So currently, conventional mounding is the go-to technique to address this problem. So an excavator comes in and it digs a pile of peat and then it flips it over to create a mound. And this mound is a drier and warmer microsite that will support tree growth. So we have to recognize that mounding is both a treatment and a disturbance. You have to redisturb a line in order to treat it. Now, I think it's also important to recognize that this is not a cookbook situation. Some sites that are treated with mounding respond very well. This is a site we visited earlier this fall, and the trees are overhead 10 years after treatment. It's a beautiful example of how mounding can really contribute to the goal of returning to forest cover. Other places, it's not working so well. This is another site nearby where the peat has sort of dissolved. The trees have not been able to establish, and I think they were treated in pretty much the same way. So we need this environment of continual improvement in evidence-based practices surrounding treatment. So BERA researchers and collaborators have been experimenting with alternative mounding techniques designed to minimize disturbance to the soil and the vegetation. As I described the outright mounding technique where the excavator flips it upside down, creating this pile with inverted soil layers beside a deep pit. And this is what I consider like a most disturbed type of treatment. An upright mounding technique, which is the middle one, is where the mound is dug from the line, but it's not flipped over to expose the older peat. We leave it upright. And in many cases, we can actually leave the vegetation intact on top of the mound. So I consider this kind of a mid-disturbance treatment. And then a hummock transfer technique is where you take a hummock from the adjacent forest and then you move it onto the line. So not only do we not have a pit on the line and we have vegetation on the hummock, but in some cases I've seen treatments like that where the trees actually move it onto the line and it almost makes it look like the line disappears immediately after treatment. So I would consider this sort of the least disturbed. There's a lot of work going on this subject and you're going to hear more about this later on today. Okay. That's pretty much the end of my introductory comments regarding BERA and the problems that we're working on. A quick look back on some of our accomplishments, which I had to shortchange here in order to keep us on track. But now I'm going to talk about the workshop goals. So a good part of the day here is going to be devoted to BERA researchers describing their objectives and the activities that are currently underway in this year 2 of our program. And by my count, we have 27 projects that will be tabled for you in one way or another. Our primary strategy is to do this through lightning talks. I'll give you some advice after the break on how to survive a BERA research update round. It's going to be wild and woolly, but I think they're super fun. Another big part of our day will be devoted to discussions and engagement opportunities. We have a panel discussion coming right up and a couple of poster sessions and some breakouts where I think we're going to get back to interacting with each other after more than 2 years of trying to do so on Zoom. The PI group has also learned a lot from applied research partnerships that we've done in the past. And I think we do things a little bit differently in BERA. Some of the projects I've involved in the past don't really effectively engage partners and collaborators outside of academics. The way we do it in BERA is we have something called a research working group. And so when a researcher is working on a project that might be part of a larger graduate program, they do it one subject at a time. And these are the projects. And every time there's a project, what we do is we try and put together a research working group that involves members outside of academics. So people from our partner group, people from our collaborator group, stakeholders. So one of the big things we want to do here today is to increase connections amongst the researchers and stakeholder groups. Essentially what we want to try and do is recruit more collaborators. And then finally, we're going to challenge you to have some discussions, make some actions that will benefit restoration in Alberta throughout the day. Okay, so I'm going to take a quick walk through our program here. How are we doing for time? We're good. It's a miracle. That's awesome. So we are kind of midway through the first session, I would say. I'm almost done my framing and introduction to BERA. Then we're going to be having a panel discussion. Matthew Piper will come up and lead us through a panel discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. After the break, we're going to have the first of our research updates session. So I'm going to call this one session 1. And there are 2 themes that we're going to cover in that session: promoting return to forest cover and then restoring natural carbon dynamics. You'll recognize these as 2 of our strategic priorities. And the way it's going to work is that the PI who's responsible for that priority, for that team, is going to come up and give a bit of a 10-minute framing presentation. And then we're going to have this series of lightning talks, which are 2-minute rapid fire presentations. So for example, after Scott is done, Colleen from the University of Alberta, who's going to come and give us essentially a 2-minute elevator pitch about her work, about her project. And this is going to continue. There's going to be 5 or 6 of these related to the first theme. And then Maria and Scott will come and do the same thing for the second theme, restoring natural carbon dynamics. They'll give 10 minutes, followed by this rapid fire series of lightning talks. Once that is all done, then we're going to release you for about an hour to go out into the atrium here and to interact with the researchers and each other more socially around the posters. So we'll have about an hour to do that. And we're going to come back and we're going to have a quick plenary review session. And that's a research update session. We're going to do one of these before lunch. We're going to have some lunch and then we're going to rinse and repeat that in the afternoon for our next two themes. Maintaining wildlife habitat / restoring caribou habitat, which is theme 3, and then remote sensing. So Aaron's going to do the same thing, overview, series of lightning talks. You'll get to hear from me again, or you'll have to hear from me again. Series of lightning talks, release you to the posters for about an hour, and then come back for a plenary review. The last session is going to be about reflections on boreal recovery research. So we're once again going to invite Matthew up to give some opening remarks. We're going to do a bit of a breakout roundtable discussion style thing aimed at mobilizing knowledge into action. And then I'm going to wrap things up with some concluding remarks and some action planning. So that's the day. One last thing, since I do have 5 minutes left. Let's tweet, retweet, LinkedIn incinerate, or whatever you call that, about the things that we're doing today. I think it's important work. I'm going to set an example. That's pretty good. That's super goofy. I'm so bad at social media. I'll finish it later. Okay, I'm going to close here. Pass it back to Julia.